you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Folks, Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Ladies and gentlemen, the early sings it. We make it official. For 16 years, nearly 3,000 episodes, we are bringing you the oldest podcast still alive that broadcasts daily, multiple times a day, actually. Yeah, we've got that caveat now. And there's about, I think, a handful of podcasts that hopefully will outlive, knock on wood. So support the show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss. Oh, it's a crazy place on the internet. Opinions expressed by guests on the podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the Chris Voss Show. Some guests of the show may be advertising on the podcast, but it is not an endorsement or review of any kind. Today, we have an amazing young man joining us on the show. We're going to be talking about his book and some of his insights and all that good stuff. His book is entitled The ESA, E-S-A, for those of you Googling it when you're going into Amazon. The ESA, God's Rescue Plan for Humanity by Mark Stouffer. And just in case you're searching that on Amazon as well, the God's part, G-D-S, Rescue Plan for Humanity. The ESA, God's Rescue Plan for Humanity, and there'll be a link for it on the Chris Voss Show. Mark Stouffer is joining us. He is a retired engineer who lives with his family in Columbus, Ohio. He was born in 1960 and grew up loving sports. After college, he was found by God. Mark has a passion for the Bible, which he has been studying and teaching for over 40 years. He's been to Israel and has great respect for the Jewish people. Welcome to the show, Mark. How are you?
Oh, thank you. I'm doing great today.
And we're great to have you. Give us your .coms, websites, any places you want people to get to know you better.
I can be found on Goodreads, but my website is lovingkindnessofadonai.com. And that's where I have some videos and some resources and links to my books on Amazon.
So give us how many books have you written in total, by the way?
So my third book just launched in May, and I've got one more in this. They're all in a series. One more coming out, hopefully around Christmas time this year.
And so give us a 30,000 over what's inside this one.
So this one, yes. Let me just say that they're a series, and the series has to do with a statement Jesus made, a very bold claim that he was debating with some of the religious leaders of the Jews, and he said, "You guys search out your scriptures to find out the key to eternity." And then he said, "They're all about me." And when I read that verse, it was so bold. And so all these books cover different elements from the Tanakh, or what Christians call the Old Testament, and different elements. And we look to see how strongly they do prophesy or foreshadow Jesus. And in this one, the element is God's rescue plan for humanity to save us from our sins, save us from this broken world. And so we go through the Bible. In this one, we go through the Old Testament and then on into the New Testament to see how God's plan progresses, and to see what the role of the Messiah is in his plan, and to see if Jesus, what he did, fits that role.
And what is the ESA, what is that term in the title of your book refer to exactly?
Yes, that's a good question. That's a Hebrew word, and it's usually translated into English as counsel, God's counsel. But it can mean his purpose or his plan. And so I'm using it because my book is about his rescue plan.
Now tell us more about this rescue plan.
Yes, that's really the framework of the Bible. Is it starts off in the beginning. After one chapter, he creates everything, the universe and earth, and In chapter 2, he creates man, and man's in paradise with God as their father, Adam, and he creates, and this is very important to me, the next thing he creates is a woman and a marriage. If I digress for just a moment here, he doesn't create a government, right? He creates a family, and he creates specifically a married couple. And it's such a precious gift from God. So that just means more to me as I get older and appreciate my wife, who's a blessing to me. And then in chapter 3, it all falls apart. Everybody knows the story with the snake and the apple, and they rebelled. They had one rule and they broke it. So, and when they broke it, they covered themselves with fig leaves, and so much of the Bible is in our vernacular today, isn't it? This term comes from Genesis chapter 3. And God said, "Where are you?" And they said, "Oh, we're naked, so we thought we'd be in the woods." And he's, "Who told you were naked?" And then they had a whole conversation. And right there in the beginning, he introduces the beginning seeds of a plan that he already has worked out to one day restore them back into his presence, into full acceptance and being acceptable to be in his presence. But it's a very long-term plan, and it progresses throughout the Bible. The world descended into sin and chaos, and he started over with Noah, and then at some point thereafter, he started with one man, Abraham. And Abraham was very old. He was 100 when he had his child. His wife was 90, Sarah. It was a miracle. And he said, and God had promised him for 25 years that you're going to have a child, and one day they will be a nation. These are the Jews. And these were his people that he was working through in the Old Testament, and he gave them the law, and that's very important. And I explain how that's part of his plan. They were to follow it, and he was going to bless them, and he was going to protect them. He was going to bless all the work of their hands, their crops, their animals, and they were going to live in a just society with a strong legal system, and they were going to worship him and not some pagan deities with debauched, abominable worship practices. And he was going to bless them, and the whole world would be able to look at them and see God, because they knew the real God, and other people worship false gods. But then the Jews didn't do so well. They didn't follow him very well, and a lot of things happened. And then at the pivot point in history, Jesus came, and I think everybody knows what he did. He died to pay the price for our sins. And then he sent out his followers, and he worked with them for 3 years, and he slept with them, and he ate with them, and he traveled with them, and they helped him. And then he sent them out in pairs on a couple occasions. And then he resurrected, and he stayed with them for 7 more weeks. And then he ascended, and then they and all of his followers thereafter were sent out to the ends of the earth with the message of salvation. And then, so that's his plan. And then there's some prophecy about the very end, when things like in the days of Noah are going to spiral out of control morally, in war and death and destruction. And he's going to return to work with the Jews for the final 7 years. And then at the very end, he's going to come back and he's going to set everything right. So that's a very long answer, but that's his plan.
And that's what you outline in the book and talk about some of the deets there, right?
Yeah.
And what was the impetus that made you want to write this book? What made you had that moment of epiphany where you're like, darn, I'm going to write about this?
Yeah, I did. And I wrote my first book, and that was like 6 years ago when I started writing. And even from the beginning, within a month, I had the outline for all 4 books. And my first element from the Old Testament was a sacrificial system. There's a rich sacrificial atonement system in the Jewish law. And I look at that in detail. And then we look at Jesus's crucifixion, and we look to see, do these things line up? Was it foreshadowing Jesus? 2,000 years earlier, or no, it really doesn't match. So the reader can make their own determination, but we go through the passages. I also cover a number of men, Old Testament heroes, that had striking events or character qualities that were strikingly similar to Jesus. And that's just very interesting. And again, you can look at the passages from the Old Testament, you can look at what Jesus did, and then the reader can decide, that's interesting, or no, that's more than that. And then the second book, we go through Messianic prophecy. This book, we go through God's plan. Final book that's coming out in the fall or the winter, I'm going to do a literary analysis of the Old Testament.
Oh, wow.
And we're going to look at how it ends. And I think how it ends is striking, and it can't be the end of a book. No one would end a book this way. It ends in the book of Malachi, with God saying that he's going to rub vomit on the priests' faces because they were so misrepresenting him so poorly as the spiritual leaders. So by that point, he's worked with the Jews for 1,500 years. And then he says that, and then it ends. And we're going to go through that. We're going to go through all the plot lines that are open in the beginning of the Old Testament. None of them are resolved by the end of the Old Testament. And it and it ends in a disaster. And so then we're going to go to the New Testament. We're going to look at its message, and we're going to, again, present to the reader, does this resolve the open plot lines from the Old Testament? So that's an overview of all the books.
And how many books in total have you written? Maybe there were some additional ones, maybe? How many total have you written?
No, just this series, 3, and then 1 coming out.
Oh, 1 coming out. And what's the anticipated release date of that?
Hopefully late November.
What made you so interesting? It seems like a lot of this stuff comes from the Jewish Kabbalah, maybe a little bit, with a mix of the Bible. Is that a correct interpretation, or am I?
Yeah, you're right. I've read a number of Jewish books written by their theologians, and I simply wanted to understand their beliefs, but mainly as Christians, God gives each of us a passion and each of us a gifting, a special ability, and I've had a passion to study the Bible, which I've been doing for over 40 years. And so I'm an imperfect person, but for sure. And
sucks to be you, man. I'm perfect. No, I'm just we all are. You're the one.
We all are. And I'm in touch with my imperfect more than anybody else. And
that's because you have a wife who reminds you all the time.
Wow, I'm so lucky. She is so forgiving.
True. That's true. That's
so
true.
Wonderful. But God, what I'm trying to say is God is so gracious that at a point in time, he's now, Mark, you've been studying this, and he's been with me as I studied it. And
nice.
Answered prayers to, what does that mean? And sometimes right away I could see, and sometimes it was years later when I'd learned. But at a point in time, let's do something with this. And that's when I started writing these books.
So you've got an accountability partner to say, hey, let's write this book. I think I might have misspoke. I might have said Cabal instead of Kabbalah earlier. So if I did misspeak, don't write me, folks. Cabal. I have a lot of respect for the Jewish faith and people. So the thing I wanted to bring up with you too is, now we talked about the title of your book has the word God, but it's G-D in how you utilize it throughout the book and on the title. Tell us why that is and what that means.
Yes, so that's the most asked question I get. And it's just how not every Jewish theologian, but a number of them write the word God. They have so much respect that they don't even want to spell G-O-D. So they put a hyphen in it. And I just do that out of respect for them. It would be like if you go in a synagogue and you put on a yarmulke, you're just being respectful. And that's really my tone in the book to Jewish people, is I'm presenting an argument, but with respect.
Now, how has it been received by the Jewish people? Because there's a lot of variations of the Jewish thing. There's your people who are ultra Orthodox, and then there's some that they believe in the religion and stuff. I think the ultra Orthodox, they wear the big black hats and usually have the big beards and wear black all the time, I think. And so, you got new variances of maybe people that are a little extreme in their belief systems or narrow or just mild, maybe. How has the book been received by that community, or the Jewish community as a whole, maybe?
To be honest, I don't know.
Okay.
They'll
find you and tell you. Just give it time. It's the
haven't
internet.
gotten feedback. Yeah.
It's the internet. The trolls are everywhere. It puts something on YouTube and you'll hear about it for sure.
Yeah.
So let's see here. What are some other aspects of the book that we can tease out to people to entice them to pick it up? Talking about some of the details that you outline in it.
Okay. So I go over near the beginning, Jewish history, ancient Jewish history, which I get from the Bible. 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. God is not covering for any of their mistakes. Their warts are in plain view in the Bible. David's sin with Bathsheba and so on, and all their kings and their good moments too. But so that's one thing that actually separates the Bible from other books. You're not reading these otherworldly depictions of their great leaders. No, the truth is presented, and when you read it, you know it. So I get my history about how the Jews did from the Bible. And then in the first 100 years of Christianity is recorded in the New Testament. Actually, this first 65 to 70, it goes up to 100 AD. And Jesus died in early 30s AD. But then after that, we have a lot of historical writings. So I cover the Catholic Church. I don't cover the Orthodox Church just because I'm not writing an encyclopedia. I'm just writing a book. And I'm an American. So mainly we have the Catholicism here, not the Russian Orthodox Church. Yes, there's some Greek Orthodox, but mainly Catholicism. I cover that. And I cover that between 100 AD, when the Bible leaves off, and 1800. And then I cover modern Christianity from 1800 to today. But I find that this long chapter on the Catholic history very interesting. I was able to, it's just such a great time to live, able to go on the internet, access archives from the Vatican, read hundreds of pages of encyclicals and bulls written by the popes. And some of that was boring, but some of it was very interesting. And so we go through the history. I also read a number of historians, and most of them were Catholics, but some of them were not. And so I find that very interesting, and a reader may find that very interesting as well.
That should be pretty darn awesome, where people can get engaged in that. Now, tell us about your history. You're not Jewish, are you? Or
No.
What interests you in the Jews and the Jewish religion? And then how long have you been involved in religion? Did you grow up in religion or find it in your later years?
That's a great question. Yeah, I grew up in a mainline Protestant denomination, but it was very liturgical, ritualistic, and I didn't connect with it. And then after college, God miraculously reached out to me in my heart. And I say that very confidently because he's done this with many people, not just me. And I opened the door of my heart just a little bit, and I said, "Who are you, God? And how do you go to heaven?" And he answered that prayer. He brought someone in my life. And so anyway, I became a Christian. And like I said earlier, I loved studying the Bible. And I've been in a great church. It's a mega church, you could call it, evangelical, where we focus on the Bible. And I've had many great people in my life that have built into me, and many opportunities to do ministry and serve. And so that's my story.
Pretty amazing stuff there in what you got going on, and leading people down this journey. Do you get interested in any other religious tomes, or do you feel that maybe the Kabbalah and some of the Jewish religions are probably, I don't know, maybe some of the most truest religions between the two, Christianity and that, or I don't know.
It's interesting. So the Muslims believe in the Quran, but they believe in the Old Testament and the New Testament as well. But they believe, and this is common knowledge, that they've been corrupted. So anywhere it disagrees with the Quran, they're like, "Oh, they corrupted it." And so they have a pretty different understanding of the Old Testament than the Jews. But interestingly, the Jews and Christians pretty much agree on the meaning of the Old Testament, only in passages where we go back and we say that's a prediction of Jesus. Then they're like, no, that maybe it's a prediction of Israel or maybe Hezekiah or something like that. But pretty much most of it we agree on. And so that's interesting. But being a Christian, without a doubt, the Jews are God's people, and I respect them. And in the New Testament, Paul says that too. The promises of God are irrevocable. He's coming back to the Jews, but he was taking a break, and that's a big subject. I won't go into that, but which he clearly has, the diaspora. Jews know that.
Okay.
But they're back in their land today, and I believe that's the hand of God. But not only that, but also the Jewish people I know have been beautiful people. I have great respect for them. So that's where my love for them comes from.
Yeah, I have a lot of good friends that are Jewish, and in fact, so much so that I say "oy vey" all the time instead of swearing, which is good because part of my family's Mormon and they don't like swear words. If I can use "oy vey" around them, it works better. So
that's good.
Yeah,
I'm not allowed to swear. My wife doesn't like it, and
see, if you can say "oy vey," like no one knows it's a swear word. My brother had to take me aside and be like, what does oy vey mean? Because if you taught my kids to say something that's really disgusting, it's not going to be good. And I'm like, no, it's just kind of a Jewish, like, oops, sort of thing. I don't know the exact, I looked it up one time years ago and I'm like, okay, this is fine. But yeah, oy vey is a great way to fill expletives. And then you still got that punch where you kind of feel it and get out of your system like you would the F word. But you can say oy vey, and then you're free.
Are you addicted to that? You say it all the time?
I do say it way too much. I do say it way too much, especially if I get around Jewish people and they say it, it triggers me and I'll start saying it. You know, when you're around people, like if I get around Canadians, I'll always say oi or not oi. I always say a and a boot. And what's the other one that's a favorite? A boot, oi. Anyway, so yeah. Anyway, I like to trigger or tap into the Canadians when they come on the show. A lot of them, if they're doing the proper, they don't do the A's or the boots. But if you start cueing them, they'll start doing it. It's kind of funny. It's funny, yeah, but things. But no, it's wonderful people. We love Canadians too. Canadians are awesome, nicest people in the world, and Australians too. What more haven't we touched on in your book? Should we talk about? Should we tease out before we go?
I'll just say, let me just go to one of the guys in the first book that had something similar happen to Jesus. My favorite book in the Bible is the book of Daniel, and there's just tremendous prophecy in there. But there's also some narrative passages, and one of them is the famous story where he gets thrown in a lion's den. And I think where we see that in America today, or perhaps in children's books with cute little Fisher-Price lions, or maybe on wallpaper for the baby's room and things like that. But actually, he was thrown in a lion's den. And, you know, that's very interesting. And he was thrown in because he was elevated to a very high position in the Persian Empire by the king who loved him. He was a godly man, and the king appreciated him, and he was an honest man. And the other governors in the empire were jealous of him, and they pulled a ruse, and they got him thrown into this lion's den for praying to his God, which he would not stop. And they had a bogus law passed for a month that you could only pray to the king, and the king fell for their trick. So anyway, sure enough, Daniel was caught praying and thrown in the lion's den, and they put a seal over they rolled a big rock over the opening of the cave. They put a seal over it from the government, and the next morning the king loved Daniel, and he ran down, and sure enough, Daniel came out alive. And as I read that, I thought, you know what, that is a prophecy. It's a narrative, but it's not a prophecy, it's a foreshadowing of Jesus's resurrection. It's all these details line up. The next day, Jesus was dead, and his body was placed in a tomb, and they rolled a big boulder in front of the opening of the tomb, and they put a seal from the governor over it. And not the next day, but 3 days later, his closest friends, Mary and Peter and John, ran down there just to see what was happening. And the boulder was rolled away and the body was gone. And so anyway, we see when you read this story in Daniel how it lines up line for line with what happened to Jesus when he got resurrected. And so that's just an example of how much foreshadowing there is in the Old Testament.
Yeah, Jesus went full zombie. He escaped the thing. This jokes, people don't write me. Yeah, but I think people in this audience know me after 16 years. So wonderful story, wonderful insights. People can check out your other books and all that good stuff. As we go out, give people a final pitch out to pick up your book, .coms, wherever they can find you, etc.
Yeah, my books are on Amazon. My name is Mark Stouffer. The newest book that just came out is The ESA, E-S-A. And my website is lovingkindnessofadonai.com.
All right. Sounds good then. Thank you very much, Mark, for coming to the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And you can find a link for his book on The Chris Voss Show. It is entitled The ESA, God's Rescue Plan for Humanity, the Loving Kindness of God. And God is spelled G-D-S if you're Googling that on the interwebs or on Amazon. So make sure you watch for that. And ESA is spelled E-S-A. For those of you out there. And of course, it's easy just to go to Chris Voss Show and click on the link. See how that works? Anyway, thanks guys for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss1 on the TikTokity. And why am I singing the end noise? Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the most amazing, intelligent podcast ever made to improve your brain and your life. Warning, consuming too much of the Chris Voss Show podcast can lead to people thinking you're smarter, younger, and irresistible sexy. Consume in regularly moderated amounts. Consult a doctor for any resulting brain bleed.